Hi you guys, it's Mrs. Akins. This video is for the second and third graders. If you are not a second or a third grader, head to my channel, go to my playlist and find your grades playlist, and in that playlist you'll find lesson number 2. That's what this week is. So second and third grade, hello. We're going to start with our rhythm of the week, and I'm going to second grade especially. Second grade, you're kind of get a crash course today on writing the beats underneath your rhythms of the week. This is something we're going to do next year in third grade. And if you get a little bit of a head start on it now, perfect. My third graders have been working on this this year, and so they've kind of got a bit of a start on it. And I've actually picked a really straightforward rhythm of the week so that we can work together on figuring out our beats. It's not super wild. I think you'll be able to do it just fine. Okay, so stick with me. If you have questions about this, I'm going to give you guys like a little extra assignment to take a look at it and do some practice. But I think you'll get it. You guys are smart cookies. Okay, so this is our rhythm of the week. So normally, if we would write in third grade, you'll remember this too. We would put ta underneath here, underneath our quarter note, and then underneath our rest, I would just write a little lowercase r, and we would whisper rest. So as we start to grow our musical knowledge, we really want to step up our rhythm reading. And to do that, we really want to use counts. So counts are numbers. So the first thing I'm going to notice is I'm going to notice the 4s over here. So the 4s are called a time signature. And all they tell me is that you've got 4 beats in this measure. You can't put any more in here, and you can't put any less in here. It's like if you were filling up one of those little measuring cups with water, like a cup measuring cup. You can't put any more than a cup of water in it or you're going to overflow. So it's kind of how this measure is. You can't put any more in it or you're going to overflow the measure. So the way the rhythm works with counts is like this. The very first thing in this measure is this quarter note. I'm actually going to put count number 1 underneath. Count number 1. Straightforward, huh? First thing in the measure always gets count number 1. Now count number 2 is going to go next. Okay, the only difference is that I'm actually going to put parentheses, and this is kind of hard to see. Let me just use my black marker. Sorry guys, give me a second. Let me go back here and redraw over my 1 there. That's easier to see. And then I'm going to do my 2 here. Now, because this 2 is underneath a rest, I'm actually going to put parentheses around it. This just helps remind me, hey, this is a rest. You need to be quiet here. So let me put my parentheses around my 2. See that? Kind of sloppy, but they work. So then I'm actually, what beat do you think is going to come next? I've got my 1, I've got my 2, I need 4 beats total, so it's either going to be a 3 or going to be a 4. What do you think? It's going to be a 3. It's going to be a 3. So if you picked 3, nice job. So 3 is going to go next. I do not have to put parentheses around it because it's underneath a quarter note. So it's going to make sound. And then lastly, my last quarter rest is going to get 4, and I'm going to put parentheses around it. So when I'm saying this, instead of saying tas and rests, I'm actually going to speak the counts. So it would sound like this. It would sound like this. Follow along with me. Ready? And 1, 2, 3, 4. So do you hear how I'm whispering the 2 and the 4? Because those are rests. If I was clapping this, I'm not going to clap on those rests. So that's why I'm whispering them. So will you speak it with me? Ready? Go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nice job. Now, can you try it where you're clapping? And you're only going to clap on beats 1 and 3. 2 and 4 are silent beats. So try it with me. Speak it and clap it if you can. 1, 2, ready, go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nice job. So I have another one for you to try, but I'm not going to help you with this one. So I wrote it on the back, even though there's the little ABCs up here, just so that I didn't have to waste time rewriting it for you. So here we have our 4s. So it's telling me I can only have 4 beats in my measure. And here's our rhythm. So what I want you to do is I want you to copy this rhythm down on anything, paper, napkin, whatever works best. And then I want you to try to write the counts underneath. Okay, try to write the counts underneath. So here's our rhythm of the week for reference. And then here's our rhythm I want you to try. Okay, if you think you have the counts correct. And even if you are like, I'm not really sure, take a picture and send it to me. I'm going to post an assignment and you can attach a picture right there so you can send your picture to me so I can check it out. Okay? So if you're thinking, oh, man, Mrs. Akins, this is a lot all at once, that's okay. Learning your counts takes time and it's nothing to be worried about. If you have any questions about it, we're going to keep doing that. And if you have questions, just ask them. Send me an email, send me a message on Google Classroom, on Dojo for second grade, just however works best for you, just ask and I'll help, okay? So we are actually going to talk about Scott Joplin. So you are probably recognizing this gentleman here. He hung out on my board for about a month while we started working on our concert music, and we just never gave him the time that he deserved. And so I decided that we should take time today and talk about Scott Joplin, since April is almost over. So Scott Joplin was born in the USA. He was actually born down in Texas, and which is really cool because we don't actually talk about a lot of composers that are born in the USA. Classical music as we know it really started over in Europe, and so getting to talk about a composer who was born and did all of his composing in the US is kind of cool. So Scott Joplin was born in Texas, and he actually started learning music from his parents, but they really weren't musicians. They just kind of knew a little bit, and they actually had a piano at home. It had kind of gotten just passed down, and Scott Joplin really loved playing his piano, and he actually wanted to play it so often that his mom made a rule that he was only allowed to play when she was cleaning. That's it, no other time. So he would play the piano, and he actually wanted to learn more. So he actually sought out music teachers in his area, and those music teachers kind of helped him develop his skills. So he ended up kind of learning music and not really composing yet because no one really knew who he was, and he wasn't really performing either because no one wanted to hear his music yet. They didn't know how awesome it was going to be. So he ended up actually working to build railroads for a long time until he was into his 20s. When he was in his mid-20s, he actually started to teach piano lessons privately. So he would basically have himself and then a student working one-on-one and learning the piano. And so this started, during this time, it kind of built some confidence for him, and he started to compose too. So he started composing what are called rags. And rags are essentially typically played on the piano, but they don't have to be. But most early rags were played on the piano. And rags are music that are syncopated. And syncopation is when you have music that sits in weird spots in the measure, and it almost makes the music feel a little off. What this does is it actually creates music that's fun to dance to. It's really fun to listen to. It would be almost like if you were wearing shoes, but you had one shoe on and one shoe off. So if you were trying to walk with one shoe on and one shoe off, you'd probably feel a little off balance. And that's kind of the way rags feel. They just feel a little off because just because of the way the notes sit in the measure. And Scott Joplin wrote a ton of these rags. Over his entire career, he wrote over 100 of them. There's one rag that in particular that became really popular, and that was called his maple leaf rag. His maple leaf rag is kind of the rag that everyone else, if you were trying to compose a rag, you would take a look at the maple leaf rag to see how Scott Joplin wrote it so that you could use it to help yours. Composers, any other composer at the time that was composing rags was looking at Scott Joplin's music to try to see, wow, how is he creating this really fun music? So as Scott Joplin became a little more popular, he actually moved up to Chicago to continue to compose, and he actually attended a bunch of like musical art fairs. And as he composed there, his music got a little more popular. People started to know who he was, and that maple leaf rag that I mentioned really took off. It ended up being one of the most purchased pieces of music ever at the time. And I think it's the most sold ragtime song ever. If you like the music that we hear on the radio, if you hear a song on the radio that you hear over and over again because people just love it and request it all the time, that's kind of how the Maple Leaf Rag was. People started arranging it to be played on other instruments other than the piano. There's actually a really cool recording of, I think it's the United States Army Band playing it, arranged for band instead of piano, and they're playing it, I think it's like a 1907 recording. It's really cool. I'll try to see if I can find it for you. But this piece was just it was huge, and it really made Scott Joplin's name a little bit more recognized in the musical community. So Scott Joplin stayed in Chicago for a little bit, and then he ended up moving to New York City. He really wanted to compose an opera. And an opera is like a musical. It's got staging, it's got the orchestra down in the pit, and it's a big undertaking if you want to compose an opera, because you have to do the singing on stage, you've got to do the storyline, you got to figure out staging, who comes on, who comes off, and then you got to write all the music for the orchestra too. So it's a big deal. And it requires a lot of time and a lot of money. So Scott Joplin moved to New York City to start working on this opera. And he ended up kind of running out of money. He got it all written, and then he wanted to see it performed. But you've got to think about it. If you're getting an opera performed, you've got to pay orchestra musicians. You've got to pay singers to come sing and act out your opera on the stage. And then you've got to pay for costumes. You got to pay for the staging, the set, all of the cool stuff in the background that helps create the story for you. And Scott Joplin just really didn't have the money to put it all together at the time. And he ended up kind of creating, doing a little rendition of it with a piano accompaniment. They were not quite as cool of a set design. And it ended up being, people were a little pretty critical of it. They weren't a huge fan of that opera. And it ended up taking almost 60 years, long after Scott Joplin had passed away, for an opera company to basically take the opera and put it on stage. It was in the 1970s was the first time that this opera was ever actually performed fully, because after the letdown from Scott Joplin's kind of failed performance, he ended up taking a break from composing, and actually, unfortunately, ended up getting really sick and passing away after that. So he never got to see that opera fully realized, which is a bit of a bummer. But what is cool is that during his career and during his lifetime, he really got to see the influence of his ragtime music. That is huge. People still play rags today. When I was taking piano lessons back when I started taking piano lessons when I was a third grader, and I would say probably when I was in maybe 8th grade, I actually had this book of Christmas ragtime, and it was all these cool Christmas songs that were like turned into rags, and they were really, really fun. They were hard to play, but I loved learning them because they were just super fun. It was just created this really cool take on a Christmas carol. So these rags are still being used today. People are still playing them all the time. So it's very influential. One cool thing too is that when back in his 20s, when Scott Joplin was teaching piano lessons, he actually taught a bunch of students that ended up going on to become really, really accomplished pianists and composers. So he had a huge influence on people his whole life. I think even when he didn't realize that he was having a huge influence. And it's kind of like us. Maybe we're having an influence on people even though we don't really realize it. You just never know. Hopefully a positive one. So that's Scott Joplin. So what things I want you to do is I want you to take a look at the videos that I have linked for you in the description. Take a look at those and really listen for the that kind of funky syncopation. See if you kind of feel it. And then don't forget to write down your rhythm and try to do the counts. One more time. Take a look at this for reference. And this is the one I want you to write down and send me a picture of. And again, I'll have an assignment for that too in Google Classroom. So check that out. So that's that. And I will talk to you later. Bye, you guys. Have a good weekend.